Chapter 31. I awoke the next day, quite recovered. I thought a bath would be of service to me, and I went and took a dip in the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. Of all seas, surely this best deserved the name. I came back to breakfast with a sharpened appetite. Hans was busy cooking our meal and having fire and water at his disposal this time. He was able to vary our bill of fare. He supplied us with several cups of coffee, and that delicious beverage never seemed to me so palatable. "Now," said my uncle, "it is nearly high water, and we must not lose the opportunity of observing this phenomenon." "What? The tide?" I exclaimed. "Undoubtedly. Do you think the influence of the sun and moon is felt in this region?" "Why not? Every particle of a solid body is governed by the force of attraction. This mass of water cannot escape the universal law. Therefore, notwithstanding the atmospheric pressure on its surface, you will just see it rise like the Atlantic." At this moment, we reached the sandy shore, and the waves were gradually gaining ground. "The tide is certainly coming in," I said. "Yes, Axel, and you may see by these foam streaks, it rises at least 10 feet. "It is wonderful." "Not at all. It is the natural order of things." "You may say it as you will, uncle. I cannot but think it is extraordinary. In fact, I can hardly believe my senses. Who would have imagined that beneath our Earth's crust there is a real ocean? With its ebb and flow, it breezes and it storms." "Why not? Is there any physical reason against it?" "I know of none. If you abandon the central fire theory, then, so far, Davy's theory is supported." "So it would seem, and if that is so, there may be seas and countries in the interior of the globe?" "Yes, but uninhabited?" "Why so? Why not these waters contain fish of some unknown species?" "At any rate, we have met with none so far." "Well, we can make some wine, and see if the fish hook will be as successful here as in our sublunary waters." "We will try, Axel, for we must do our utmost to find out all the secrets of these unexplored regions." "But where are we, uncle? For we have not yet asked that question." "Your instruments will have told you our whereabouts. Our position is horizontally 1,050 miles from Iceland." "So far?" "I am certain within 500 fathoms. And the compass still pointing northeast?" "Yes, with a western declination of 19 degrees 40 inches, just as on the surface. As to the inclination, there is a curious fact, which I have observed very carefully. The needle, instead of dipping toward the pole, as it does in the northern hemisphere, has an upward direction. Then we may conclude that the magnetic pole is a point contained between the surface of the globe and the depth we have reached?" "Exactly. And I think it is very likely that if we arrived in the polar regions toward the 70th degree, where Sir James Ross discovered the magnetic pole, we shall see the needle take vertical position. Therefore, this mysterious point is at no great depth. That is a fact which science has never guessed." "Science, my boy, is made up of mistakes, but of mistakes which lead to discovery of truth." "And how far down are we?" "About 100 miles. "Well then," I said, after consulting the map, "the mountainous part of Scotland is just above us, where the lofty Grampians rise in their snowy summits." "Yes," said the professor, smiling. "There is something of weight to carry, but the arc is strong, and the great architect of the universe has used good materials, and no human builder could have given it such a span. What the great arches of bridges and cathedrals beside this great nave, whose radius is 9 miles, and under which there is a space for an ocean and its storms. Oh, I am not afraid of the roof falling over my head. But now, uncle, what are your plans? Do you not intend on returning to the surface? Returning? What a notion! On the contrary, we will go on, as we have such luck so far. Still, I do not see how we are going to get below this watery plain. I do not intend to plunge into the head first, but as the oceans are, properly speaking, nothing more than lakes, as they are surrounded by land. No doubt its interior sea is bounded by gigantic masses. That is probable enough. Well then, on the opposite shore I am sure of finding new outlets. How long do you guess this ocean to be? From 100 to 120 miles. Hem, I said to myself, thinking of that very wild calculation. So you will see we have no time to spare. We must put to sea tomorrow. Involuntarily I looked around with wherewithal. Ah, I said, we are to embark tomorrow. On what vessel shall we take passage? Not on a vessel, my lad, but on a strong, safe raft. A raft, I said, but we can no more build a raft than a ship. You don't see, Axel, but if you listened, you could hear. Those sounds of hammering might well tell you that Hans is already at work. Do you mean he is making a raft? I do. What? He has felled trees with his axe. Oh, the trees are already to his hand. Come look at him at work. After a quarter of an hour's walking, and on the farther side of the promontory which enclosed a little port, I could see Hans at work. A few more steps, and I was at his side. To my great surprise, a raft had already half completed lay on the sand. It was made of logs of peculiar-looking wood, and a vast number of planks, knees, tides, and strewed on the ground. There was a material for the fleet. Uncle, I said, what kind of wood is that? It is pine, fir, birch, all the northern conifers, mineralized by the action of seawater. Is it possible? It is called stuttering, or fossil wood. But then, like ignite, it must be hard as stone and cannot float. Occasionally that is so. There are woods which have become true anthracites, but others, like this, are practically fossilized. But look for yourself, said my uncle, throwing into the water one of these precious fragments. The log first disappeared, then rose to the surface of the waves and followed their undulations. Are you satisfied? Said my uncle. I am convinced that this is incredible. The next evening, thanks to the skill of our guide, the raft was ready. It was 10 feet long by 5 feet wide. The logs of stuttering bound each with strong rope, offered a solid floor, and once launched, the impromptu vessel floated quietly on the waters of the Sea of Lindenbrock. Chapter 32. On the morning of August 13th, we were already astir. We were to commence our new kind of locomotion, a rapid and easy one. A mast made of 2 logs mortised together, a yard formed by a third, a sail made of one of our rugs, was all in our rigging. We had plenty of ropes. The whole affair was strongly put together. At 6 o'clock, the professor gave the signal to embark. Our provisions, baggage, instruments, firearms, and a good stock of fresh water collected among the rocks were arranged on board. Hans had set up a rudder, so to be able to guide his vessel. He took the helm. I cast off the rope that moored us to the shore. The sail was set, and we rapidly left the land. As we quitted the little harbor, my uncle, who made a great point of his geographical nomenclature, wished to fix on a name for it, suggesting mine among others. Uncle, I said, I beg you to purpose the name of Grauben. Port Grauben would look very well on a map. Well, Port Graben be it. And thus it was that the name of my beloved Verlandice became to the connected of our daring adventure. A light breeze blew from the northeast. We made a rapid way, with the wind aft. The density of the atmospheric strata gave great force, and the wind acted on the sail like an immense ventilator. An hour enabled my uncle to estimate our speed. If this rate continues, he said, we shall be about 90 miles in 24 hours, and shall soon gain the other shore. I made no reply, but when he stationed myself in the far forepart of the raft, already the northern shore was sinking below the horizon. The projecting arms of the land opened wide to let us go. A vast extent of ocean was spread before my gaze. Great clouds moved rapidly over its surface, casting gray shadows which seemed to lay down the melancholy waste of waters. The silvery rays of electric light, reflected here and there by the spray, dotted our wake with luminous points. Soon we lost sight of the land, and every point of observations, but for our track of foam, I could have believed we were motionless. Toward noon, immense algae was seen floating on the waves. I was aware of the powerful vitality of their growth, which enables them to exist at a depth of over 12,000 feet below the sea, and to fructify under pressure of 400 atmospheres. I knew that they sometimes form beds compact enough to impede the motion of a ship, but I think there can be no algae so gigantic as those of the Sea of Lindenbrock. Our raft passed along the Fuchai 3,000 or 4,000 feet long. Great serpentine brands were twisting away far out of sight. I tried to follow their endless ribbons and never came to an end. After hour increased my astonishment, of not my patience. My power of nature produces such growths, and what must we have been the aspect of the earth in the first ages of its formation, when under the combined action and heat of moisture the vegetable kingdom alone developed on its surface. Evening came, and, as I remarked the day before, the luminous state of the air seemed to suffer no diminution. It was a constant phenomenon whose stability we could reckon. After supper I lay at the foot of the mast, and soon lost myself in sleep mingled with idle reveries. Hans, motionless at helm, had only to leave the raft to itself. The wind being astern, we hardly needed steering. Leaving Port Gräuben, Professor Lindenbrock had appointed me to keep the journal on board, to note every observation, to record all interesting phenomenon, direction of the wind, and the speed attained. The distance accomplished, in a word, all the incidents of this novel voyage. I shall confine myself, therefore, to reproducing these daily notes, written, so to speak, from the dictation of events, so as to give perfectly an exact amount of our voyage across the ocean. Friday, August 14th. Steady breeze from the northwest. A raft goes fast and in a straight line. We have left the coast 90 miles behind us in the direction of the wind. Nothing on the horizon. The intensity of the light is unvarying. Weather fine, that is, the clouds are high, not dense, and bathed in a white atmosphere like molten silver. Thermometer, 58 degrees. At midday, Hans fastened a fish hook at the end of a rope. He baited it with a morsel of meat and threw it into the sea. After 2 hours, he had taken nothing. These waters were uninhabited? No. There was a bite. Hans draws his line, and lo and behold, a fish which resisted violently. "A sturgeon!" I exclaimed. "A small sturgeon!" The professor looks. He does not agree with me. The fish was a round, flat head, and the back of its body covered with bony plates. Teeth wanting, pectoral fins large, no tail. The creature belongs to the order of where naturalists have placed the sturgeon, but it differs from the sturgeon in very essential points. My uncle, after short examination, pronounced the animal belongs to a family which has been extinct for centuries, and which the Devonian beds alone show fossil remains. How, I said, can we have taken a living specimen of an inhabitant of primeval seas? Yes, said the professor, and you see the fossil fishes have no identity with present species. To have obtained a living specimen is a glad era for naturalists. But to what family does it belong? It is a ganoid, Cephalosphaceae, species Pterycticurus. I am sure, but this individual offers a peculiarity common to the fish of the subterranean waters. It is blind. It does not only not see, but the organ of sight is wanting. I looked closely and saw that this was really the case, but perhaps an exceptional one. The line is baited again and thrown into the sea. This sea must be well stocked with fish, for within 2 hours we took a great number of Pterycticurus, as well as some others belonging to another extinct family, Dipteridae. Of what species, however, my uncle was unable to pronounce. All were deficient of organs of vision. This unexpected take of fish was a welcome addition to our stock of provisions. Thus, much seems certain that this sea is inhabited by only fossil species, of which the fish and the reptiles are more perfect as their date as more remote. Perhaps we shall meet some of the saurians of which science has recreated from a fragment of bone or cartilage. I take the glasses and scan the sea. It is a desert. Perhaps we are still too near the shore. I am to turn to the air. Why do we see none of the birds reconstructed by the immortal Kirby air? Flapping their great wings in this dense atmosphere, these fish would supply them with stores of food. I gaze into space, but the air is as lonely as waters. I fancy ran riot among the marvelous hypotheses of paleontology. I dream with my eyes open. I fancy this sea covered the Clanonia, these antediluvian turtles that resembled floating islands. I peopled its gloomy strand with giant mammifers of ancient times, the Lepothorium, and found in Brazilian caves the Mercurium from the icy region of Siberia. And farther on, the Pachydermus liphidion, the gigantic tapir, hides itself behind the rocks, ready to tear the prey from the Anoplothorium, a strange animal akin to rhinoceros, the horse, the hippopotamus, and the camel. As if the hurry of creation, one animal had been made up of several. The giant Medastron writhed its trunk and ground its tusks to the rocky shore, while the Megatherium, propped on its mighty paws, turned up the earths and roars till the granite echoes to the sound. The whole fossil world lives again in my imagination. I go back and fancy the biblical approach of creation, long before the advent of man, and the imperfect earth was not fitted to sustain him. Then, still farther back, to the time where no life existed, the mammifers disappeared, then the birds, then the reptiles of the secondary approach, then the fishes, crustaceans, mollusks, articulia, the zoophytes of transition period returned to oblivion. All life was centered in me. My heart alone beat the depopulated world. Seasons were no more. Climates were unknown. The heat of the earth increased till it neutralized that of our radiant star. Vegetation was gigantic. I passed under the shade of tree ferns, trampling with uncertain step iridescent clay of particle-colored sand. I leaned against the trunks of immense conifers. I lay down into the shade of cephalites, astrophilites, and lycopods, 100 feet high. Ages seemed to pass like days. I followed step by step the transformation of the earth. Plants disappeared, granite rocks lost their hardness, the fluid replaced the solid under the influence of growing heat. Water flowed over the earth's surface. It boiled, it volatilized. Gradually the globe became a gaseous mass, white hot, as large as luminous as the sun. In the center of the nebulous mass, 14,000 times larger than the Earth it was one day to form, I felt myself carried into planetary space. My body became eternal in its turn and mingled like an imponderable atom with the vast body of vapor which described its flaming orbit in infinite space. What a dream! Where is it carrying me? A feverish hand tries to note a few of the wild details. I was unconscious of all around. Professor, guide, raft, everything. My mind was under a hallucination. "What ails you?" said my uncle. My staring eyes were fixed on him without seeing. "Take care, Axel. You will fall into the sea." At this moment, I felt Hans' strong grip on my arm, but for him, my delirium of my dream would have made me jump overboard. "Has he lost his senses?" cried the professor. "What is it?" I said at last, regaining consciousness. "Are you ill?" "No, I had a moment of hallucination, but it is over now." "Is all going well?" "Yes, a good breeze and a calm sea. If my calculation is correct, we shall not be long before we touch land." As he spoke, I rose and carefully scrutinized the horizon, but as before, the line of sea is lost in the clouds. Chapter 33. Saturday, August 15th. The sea preserves its dreary monotony. No land in sight. The horizon looks very distant. My head is heavy from the excitement of my dream. My uncle had no dream, but he is out of humor. He sweeps the horizon with his glass and crosses his arms with an air of vexation. I remark in Professor Lindenbrock a tendency to become, as old of man, a man of impatient of the past, and I record the fact in my journal. My danger and my sufferings barely suffice to draw from him a spark of humanity. But since my recovery, his nature got the upper hand again, and yet, what is he to complain of? Our voyage has been most favorable. The raft sails with wondrous rapidity. "You seem uneasy, uncle," I said, seeing him constantly using his glass. "Uneasy? Oh, no." "Impatient, then?" "One might be impatient with less reason. And yet, our speed? What is the speed to me? The speed is well enough, but the sea is too vast." I remembered that the professor, before our departure, estimated the length of the subterranean sea about 100 miles. We had sailed 3 times that distance. The southern shore was not yet in view. "We are descending," said my professor. "All this is lost time, and in fact I did not come so far to make one of a boating party in the pond." "But," I said, "if we have followed the route pointed out by Saknussemm, that is the very question. Have we followed his route? Did we meet with this ocean? Did he cross it? Did the stream we followed mislead us utterly? At any rate, we have no reason to regret having come so far. This scene is grand. The question is not of scenery. I have an object in view, and I wish to attain it. Don't talk to me of scenery." I took the hint and left the professor to bite his lips in silence. At 6 o'clock, Hans claimed his wages, and at his 3 rix dollars were counted out for him. Sunday, August 16th. Nothing new. Weather continues the same. Wind tends to slightly freshen. When I awake, my first thought is to observe the intensity of the light. I always fear the electric phenomenon may decrease and die away, but there is no diminution. The shadow of the raft is sharply defined by the waves. The sea seems boundless. It must be as large as the Mediterranean, or even the Atlantic. Why not? My uncle has repeatedly taken soundings. He fastened one of our heaviest pickaxes to the rope and let out 1,200 fathoms. No bottom. We had great difficulty in hauling the line. When the axe came up, Hans called my attention to some strongly defined marks on its surface. It had the appearance of having been strongly compressed between 2 hard surfaces. I looked at the hunter. "Thunder," he said. I did not understand. I turned to my uncle, but he was absorbed. I did not care to disturb him. I came back to my Icelander, who opened his closed mouth, and I understood him. "Teeth," I said with amazement, and looking more closely at the iron bar. Yes, it was certainly teeth that made the impression. What prodigious power of jaw! Are we some of those extinct monsters lying at the bottom of this deep ocean? Monsters more voracious than the shark, more formidable than the whale? My eye was fascinated at the half-gnawed bar. And is my dream the last night to be realized? These thoughts agitated my mind all day, and my imagination only calmed down after a sleep of several hours duration. Monday, August 17th. I'm trying to recollect the peculiar instincts of antediluvian animals of secondary period which, following the mollusk, the crustaceans, and the fish, preceded the appearance of mammifers on the globe. These monsters were the monarchs of the Jurassic seas. Nature furnishes them with the most complete organization. What giant forms! What enormous power! The saurians of our day, alligators or crocodiles, the largest and most formidable, are only feeble miniatures of their primeval ancestors. I shudder at the phantoms I have evoked. No human eye has seen or their living forms. They appeared on the earth countless ages before man, but their fossil skeletons found the calcareous clays known as lias have allowed us to reconstruct them anatomically, and to have become acquainted with their colossal figures. I have seen in the Hamburg Museum the skeleton of one of these saurians, and that measured 30 feet in length. Am I destined to behold the face of these representatives of the antediluvian family? No, it isn't possible. And yet the mark of the mighty teeth is stamped on the iron bar. Their impress shows that the teeth are conical, like those of the crocodile. I gazed nervously at the sea, and I feared to see one of those inhabitants of submarine caves. I suppose Professor Lindenbrock was struck at the same idea, though not by my same fears, for when we had examined the pickaxe, he threw a glance around the ocean. What had possessed him to take surroundings, I thought? Has he disturbed some animal of retreat, and if we are not attacked? I looked over at our firearms to satisfy that we may be in good order. My uncle observed me and nodded approbation. Already long swells of the surface of the sea indicate disturbances in the depths. The danger is at hand. We must be watchful. Tuesday, August 18th. Evening came, or rather there came a moment when sleep weighed down our eyelids. For there is no night on this ocean, and the unvarying light fatigues our eyes, as if we were voyaging on the Arctic seas. Hans was at the helm. During his watches, I went to sleep. 2 hours after, I awakened by a fearful shock. The raft was lifted off the water with an indescribable force and thrown off the waves again 40 yards off. "What is the matter?" cried my uncle. "Have we struck?" Hans pointed to a dusky mass about 400 yards off, which rose and fell alternately. I looked and I exclaimed, "It is a colossal porpoise!" "Yes," said my uncle, "and there is a sea lizard of uncommon size. And beyond that a monstrous crocodile. See the great jaws of its rows of teeth. Ah, he is gone." "A whale! A whale!" exclaimed the professor. "I see enormous fins, and see the jet of air in the water he expels from his blowholes." I saw 2 liquid columns rising to a considerable height in the air. We stood, amazed, helpless, terrified in the presence of these monsters of the sea. They were of supernatural size, and the smallest of them would have crushed our raft in the snap of his teeth. Hans wanted to turn up into the wind to escape this dangerous neighborhood, but on that side, new enemies, no less formidable, came into view. A turtle, 40 feet long, a serpent, 30 feet, who moved his enormous head with the darting motion above the waves. Flight was impossible. The reptiles were drawing nearer. They circled round our raft with the rapidity unequaled by an express train. They described the concentric circles around us. I took my carbine, but what effect would a ball have on the scale armor of these creatures? We were dumb with fear. They came nearer. The crocodile on one side, the serpent on the other. The rest disappeared. I was about to fire. Hans stopped me by a sign. These monsters passed within 100 yards of the raft. fell on one another, and their fury they overlooked. In their fury, they overlooked us. The battle was fought 200 yards away from us. We could distinctly see the struggles of these monsters, but as I watched, it appeared to me that other creatures came and took part in the contest. The porpoise, the whale, the lizard, the turtle. I had momentary glimpses of them all. I pointed them out to Hans. He shook his head. "Avia," he said. "What? 2? He says there are only 2. "He is right," said my uncle, those whose glass never had left his eyes. "You are jesting, uncle." "No. The one of them is the muzzle of a porpoise, the head of the lizard, the teeth of a crocodile, and that deceived us. It is the most formidable antediluvian reptiles, the Ichthyosaurus. And the other? The other is the great antagonist, the serpent hidden in the carapace of a turtle, whom we know as the Plesiosaurus." Hans was right. 2 monsters only made all this commotion in the sea. I had really beheld 2 reptiles of primitive age. I saw the bloodshot eye of the Ichthyosaurus as big as a man's head. Nature was provided him with optic apparatus of great power and capable of resisting pressure of the water he inhabits. He has been justly named the whale of the saurians, for he has the shape and the speed. His jaw is enormous, and naturalists tell he has no less than 182 teeth. The Plesiosaurus is a serpent with a cylindrical trunk, short tail, claws arranged like oars. His body is entirely covered with carapace, and his neck, as flexible as that of a swan's, stretches to a height of 30 feet above the waves. These animals fought with incredible fury. They raised mountainous waves, which flowed back toward the raft. Hissing sounds with great force were heard. The 2 brutes had closed with each other, and I could not distinguish one from the other. We had still to fear the fury of the victor. An hour, 2 hours passed. The battle still raged with an unabated vehemence. The combatants sometimes veered towards us, and sometimes away from us. We remained motionless, ready to fire. Suddenly, the 2 monsters disappeared, creating a maelstrom in the waters. Some minutes elapsed. Were they fighting it down below? It was all at once an enormous head darted up, the head of the Plesiosaurus. The great creature is mortally wounded. I could see nothing of his gigantic carapace, only his long neck, which rose and fell, curved and lashed the waters like the mighty whip, and writhed like a divided worm. The water was dashed to considerable distance. It blinded us, but soon the struggles of the enormous body drew out to the end. His motions diminished, his contortions became fewer, and his long serpent neck lay inert mass on the calm waves. As to the Ichthyosaurus, we asked ourselves whether we had reached his submarine cavern or whether he would again show himself on the surface. Chapter 34. Wednesday, August 19th. Fortunately, the wind, which was blowing pretty fresh, has enabled us to make rapid flight from the scene of the conflict. Hans is still at the helm. My uncle, who had been aroused from his absorbing reflections by the incidents of the struggle, relapsed into the impatient watching of the sea. The voyage was as monotonous as ever, but should I not care to have dreariness varied at the price of yesterday's dangers? Thursday, August 20th. Breeze northeast, unsteady. Temperature hot. We were going about 9 miles and a half per hour. Toward midday, we heard a very distant sound. I note the fact we were here without being able to account for it. It is like a continuous roar. "There must be, in the distance," said the professor, "some rock or island on which the sea breaks." Hans crawled up in the mast, but could see no breakers. The ocean is undisturbed as far as the eye can reach. 3 hours passed. The noise assumes the sound of a far-off fall of water. I remark this to my uncle, who shakes his head, but I am convinced I am right. Are we running toward some cataract which will precipitate us into an abyss? Such a descent may suit the professor as it approaches the vertical, but as for me, whatever it is, there must be a few miles off the phenomenon of a noisy kind. For now, we can hear a violent roaring sound. Does it come from the sky or sea? I look toward the vapor suspended in the atmosphere and try to estimate its depth. The sky is tranquil. The clouds, which have risen to the root of the vault, seem motionless and are lost in the intensity of light. Not there I can find the cause of the phenomenon. Then I turn to the horizon, now clear and free from mist. Its aspect is quite normal, but if this noise comes from a fall or cataract, or if the waters of the sea fall into the lower basin, if these roarings are produced by the falling masses of water, the current ought to increase, and its rate of acceleration may give us the measure of our danger. I try the experiment. There is no current. A bottle thrown into the water remains unaffected by the wind. About 4 o'clock, Hans rises, takes a grip of the mast, and goes to the top. Thence his eyes wander over the circle of the ocean. At a certain point, they stop. No surprise is visible on his face, but his eye is riveted. "He sees something," said my uncle. "I think so." Hans came down. Then he extended his arm to the south and said, "There, near." "Down there?" said my uncle. And seizing his glass, he gazed attentively for a minute, which seemed to me an age. "Yes! Yes! What do you see?" "An enormous jet of water rising above the waves." "Another marine animal?" "Perhaps." "Well then, let us keep her head more to the west, for we have had experience enough with the danger of meeting antediluvian monsters." "No," said my uncle. "Let her go." I turned toward Hans. He kept the tiller with inflexible steadiness. I could not conceal myself at this distance, which must be 36 miles at the very least. We can discern the column of the water he ejects. The creature must be of preternatural size. To fly only would be obey the dictates of vulgar prudence. But we did not come here to be prudent. So we went on. The nearer we approached, the higher the jet of water became. What monster could imbibe and expel without cessation such a mass of water? At 8 o'clock in the evening, we were not 6 miles from him. His enormous body, a dark mountainous mass, lay among the sea like an island. Am I under an illusion? Has fear got the better of me? His length seems to be over 2,000 yards. What cetacean could it be? Never predicted by Cuvier or Blumenbach. It is motionless, perhaps asleep. The sea cannot lift it, for the waves break on its flanks. The jet of water, rising 500 feet high, falls again in the rain with a deafening noise, and we are running madly on toward this mighty mass, which 100 whales could not suffice feed for a day. Terror seized me. It would not go no farther. I resolved to cut the halyard, if necessary. I attacked my uncle, who made no answer. All at once, Hans rose, and pointing with his finger to the spot where the danger lay, "Holm," he said. "An island!" cried my uncle. "An island?" I repeated, shrugging my shoulders. "To be sure it is," the professor bursting out into a laugh. "But the column of water—" "Geyser," said Hans. "Undoubtedly a geyser, like those in Iceland." At first, I was annoyed at having mistaken an island for a marine monster. But I cannot help myself, and must of my own error. It is nothing but a natural phenomenon. As we drew near, the dimensions of the liquid shaft became really grand. The island bears a wonderful resemblance to an immense cetacean, whose head rises 60 feet out of the water. A geyser, which in Icelandic signifies fury, rises majestically at its extremity. Muffled sounds of explosion occurred every moment, and the enormous jet rose with greater force, convulsed its canopy of vapor, and leaped up to the lower clouds. It was a solitary geyser. Neither fumarolus nor hot springs surround it, and all the volcanic force it centered itself. The rays of electric light mingled with its dazzling fountain, investing every drop with the hues of the rainbow. "Let us go around the island," said the professor, but he had to be very careful to avoid the falling waters, which would have sunk the raft into a moment. Hans merged with great skill to bring us to the other end of the island. I jumped on the rock. My uncle followed me quickly, but the hunter stayed at his post like a man superior to such excitements. We trod a granite soil mixed with silicious tufa. The ground vibrated beneath our feet like the sides of a boiler of superheated steam. The heat is intense. We came in sight of a small central basin, whence rises the geyser. I immersed our thermometer in the water, which runs away bubbling as it goes, and it marked 233 degrees. So that this water must come from a burning center. Contrary to the theory of Professor Lindenbrock, I could not refrain from giving utterance to his remark. "Well," he said, "what does that prove against my doctrine?" "Oh, nothing," I said, perceiving that he was past reasoning with. "Nevertheless, I cannot deny up to this time we have been singularly fortunate, that for some reason unknown to me, we have made this voyage under peculiar conditions to temperature. I look upon it as certain as we must, one time or another, arrived at the region where the central heat attains the greatest point, and leaves all far behind the graduations of our thermometers. We shall see, so the professor says. He has given his nephew name to the volcanic isle, and now orders us to re-embark. I stayed a few minutes longer to watch the geyser. I remarked that the jets are irregular. Sometimes the force is diminished, sometimes increased. I attribute these variations of fluctuating pressure of the vapors accumulated in the reservoir. At last we start, making a circuit by the steep rocks and the southern end. Hans has taken advantage of our halt to repair the raft. But before leaving, I took some observation to ascertain the distance we had come, and I note them in my journal. We made over 800 miles since leaving Port Gräuben, and we reckon that we are under England, 1,800 miles from Iceland. Chapter 35. Friday, August 21st. Next day, the magnificent geyser was out of sight. The wind freshened and carried us rapidly from Axel Island. The roaring sound died away gradually. The weather, if I may use the expression, will soon change. The atmosphere is dense with vapors charged with electricity generated by saline evaporation. The clouds are slowly falling and are a uniform olive tint. The electric rays can scarcely penetrate them. They look like a dark curtain led out before the stage on which the drama of the tempest is to be displayed. I have a certain premonitory sensation that animals have previous a shock of earthquake, the cumuli heaped up toward the south of the threatening look. They have a pitiless expression that I have so often noticed before a storm. The air is oppressive, the sea is calm, and the distance the clouds resemble the great bales of cotton piled up in picturesque disorder. Gradually they swell, and lose in number what they gain in magnitude. They become so heavy that they lie close to the horizon, but the upper current seems to melt them into dark formless bank of cloud full of evil boding. Now and then, a ball of vapor, still illuminated, will roll for a moment in the gray background, and if we lose itself in the opaque mass. The atmosphere is saturated with electric fluid, and my body also. My hair stands up as if the electric machine were at hand. I feel as if we should give a violent shock to my companions. They touched me. At 10 o'clock this morning, the signs of the storm became more decisive. The wind seemed as if it paused to take a breath. The cloud looked like a great bag in which tempests were collected together. I tried not to believe the stormy promise of the sky, but I could not help but saying, Bad weather is brewing here. The professor did not answer. He was in an insufferably bad humor at seeing the sea extending farther and farther as we go. He shrugged his shoulders at my words. We shall have a storm, I said, pointing at the horizon. Those clouds bear down the sea as they would have crushed it. General silence. The wind has now died away. Nature has a death-like appearance, it seems, not to draw a breath. From the mast, where I already see a faint halo like St. Elmo's fire, the sail is hanging in heavy folds. The raft lies motionless in the deep, waveless sea. But if we are not stirring, why could keep our sail up? And thus the risk of destruction at the first blast of the storm. Let us take in sail and lower the mast, I said. It would only be prudence. No, by all powers, said my uncle. 100 times no. Let me behold the rocks of the shore. I cannot care if the raft is shivered into 1,000 pieces. He scarcely said the words. When the southern horizon underwent a change, the accumulated vapors descended in rain, and the air, rushing to fill their place, produced the hurricane. It came from every quarter of the cavern. The darkness increased. I could do no more than make a few imperfect notes. Suddenly the raft rises, makes a bound. My uncle is thrown down. He takes a firm hold of the cable, and watches with delight the spectacle of the elements at war. Hans does not stir. His long hair, beaten by the wind and driven across his stolid face, gives him a weird look, for at the end of the hair is a luminous tuft. He looks like an antediluvian man, a contemporary of the Ichthyosaurus and the Megatherium. The mast still survives. A sail swells out like a bubble on the verge of bursting. The raft spins along with a speed I cannot attempt to estimate. The water rushing past seems to still fly faster still, and describes sharp, clear, arrowy lines. The sail! The sail! I exclaimed, making signs to lower it. No, said my uncle. Nedge, said Hans, shaking his head. The rain is like a roaring cataract between the horizon to which we are madly rushing. But before it reaches us, the cloud curtain tears apart and reveals the boiling sea. And now the electricity, disengaged by the chemical action of the upper cloud strata, comes into play. Loud claps of thunder, dazzling coruscations, networks of vivid lightings, ceaseless denotations, masses and incandescent vapor, hailstones like a fiery shower, rattling among our tools and firearms. The heaving of waves look like craters full of interior fire, every crevice darting a little tongue of flame. My eyes are dazzled by the intensity of flight, my ears deafened by the crash of thunder. I have to hold firmly by the mast, which is bending like a reed before the tornado. Here, my notes of the voyage become very fragmentary. I can only find a few fugitive remarks, which appear to have been written almost mechanically, but in their brevity, and even their obscurity, they bear the impress of the excitement of the time, and portray my feelings better than I could do so from memory.